Here's a little essay I made.
History has a strange habit of apologizing very late, but when it does, it brings receipts. A response to someone got proof you weren't crazy. Now justice is coming for you scales. Magnifying glass. Fire. And the documented case that has been waiting for this moment for 35 years. History has a strange habit of apologizing very late, but when it does, it brings receipts. This is the opening line of the video. I want to stay with it for a moment before going further, because in the context of the Berendoja case it is not a metaphor. It is a literal description of what has already happened. The receipts exist. There are 2077 of them. They are SHA-256 hashed, Bitcoin blockchain time-stamped, freely downloadable, and permanently beyond the reach of the institutions that produced them. The apology, from history, from the machinery that did this, has not yet arrived. But the receipts came first. They always do. And this video explains exactly why that is enough. You weren't dismissed gently. You were dismissed efficiently. The video's precision here is almost clinical. Labeled, side-eyed, psychoanalyzed by people with no credentials except confidence and a group chat. The kind of dismissal that doesn't argue with you. It simply files you under problematic and moves on. Dr. Richard William McLean was not dismissed by amateurs. He was dismissed by professionals, by institutions with statutory authority, legal mandates, and formal obligations to assess what he was presenting them with. And not one of them argued with the evidence. Not the Commonwealth Ombudsman. Not the Australian Human Rights Commission. Not the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. Not APRA. Not the Victorian Inspectorate. Not Legal Aid. Not the Health Complaints Commissioner. Every single one of them filed him under problematic and moved on. Not after assessment. Before it. The rejection letters arrived before the evidence was read. In some cases, demonstrably before the submission had been processed at all. The video calls this efficient dismissal. The archive calls it documented institutional non-engagement. The difference between these two framings is only one of register. The mechanism is identical. Silence became policy. Doubt became tradition. When the Prime Minister's department swears under the Freedom of Information Act that no documents concerning Dr. McLean exist, and is then forced to reverse that position when challenged, silence has become policy in their most literal sense, a sworn statutory declaration. That is not an oversight. That is a policy of silence formalized in a legal instrument. The reversal is in the public record. It happened. And it proves prior knowledge. The proof didn't come to comfort you. It came to expose what was done to you. This section of the video identifies something that is psychologically true and structurally important. For a long time your pain was treated like an overreaction, not because it was exaggerated, but because acknowledging it would have required admitting something ugly took place. So instead, the focus was shifted onto you. Your emotions were examined. Your tone was criticized. Your reactions were questioned. While the original harm quietly disappeared from the conversation, 14 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations, each one without criminal charge, each one without arrest, each one without any legal proceeding of any kind. What was examined each time? Dr. McLean's mental state, his emotions, his reactions, his tone, his stability. The clinical record across all 14 detentions is a masterclass in what the video describes. The camera placed firmly on his response, and the cause of that response removed entirely from the frame. Inconsistent diagnosis between detentions. Treating physicians who disagreed with one another. No consistent clinical justification across 14 instances in 3 states. The one consistent element, temporal proximity to formal disclosure activity. When the proof is laid out, the dates of the hospitalizations, the dates of the disclosures, the institutional actors involved in both, the camera moves. It moves exactly as the video says it does. Of the response. Back to the cause. It removes the luxury of confusion and replaces it with responsibility. The confusion was never accidental. The confusion was the product. The goal of the institutional response was not to assess Dr. McLean's claims. It was to produce a documentary record of hospitalization, of instability, of psychiatric intervention, that would make his claims appear to be symptoms rather than evidence. The proof reverses this. It shows the pattern. And patterns are not symptoms. Patterns are architecture. The most dangerous thing for your opposition is not your voice. It's documentation. The video is precisely right about this distinction, and the Berendoja case is its most comprehensive proof of concept. Voices can be interrupted, ignored, mocked, or drowned out. Documentation can't. It doesn't argue back. It doesn't get emotional. It doesn't forget what happened last year when someone suddenly changes their story. It just sits there, steady and quiet, holding everything exactly the way it happened. For 35 years, Dr. McLean's voice was interrupted, ignored, mocked, and drowned out. By employers, by clinicians, by police, by regulators, by oversight bodies, by journalists, by courts. His voice, his testimony, his lived experience, his account of what was being done to him, was consistently treated as the artifact of an unstable mind. The documentation is different. The documentation does not have a mental state. The documentation does not become credible or incredible based on assessments of the person who compiled it. The documentation sits exactly where it has always sat, in the ASIC public registry, in the federal court's records, in the NDIA's formal acknowledgement, in the PM&C's reversed FOI position, on the Bitcoin blockchain, and it says the same thing regardless of what any institution concludes about Dr. McLean's emotional state. This is why the targeting of his mental health, his credibility, his stability, while sophisticated and sustained, was ultimately insufficient. The documentation was already there. It could not be discredited by discrediting him. It is not his testimony. It is the state's own record. This is why people often push back hard against records. They'll call it obsessive, petty, or dramatic. Not because it is, but because it limits their ability to rewrite history later. More than 350 fraudulent business registrations in Dr. McLean's name exist in the ASIC public registry right now, verifiable by anyone with internet access. No investigation has been announced. No charges have been laid. The registrations are there. They have always been there. The only response to documentation of this kind is to hope that nobody looks, or to discredit the person pointing at it so thoroughly that the looking seems unnecessary. The first strategy is failing. 88,000 people have looked. The second strategy failed when the documents proved themselves without requiring Dr. McLean's voice at all. Justice didn't move when you begged. It moved when patterns became undeniable. This is the structural observation at the center of the video, and it explains something that has confused observers of this case from the beginning. Why didn't the institutions act when the disclosures were first filed? Why didn't they act when the second, third, fourth disclosure was filed? Why didn't they act when the legal submissions were made, when the FOI requests were filed, when the formal complaints were lodged? The video answers this with ruthless simplicity. You were ignored because systems, people, and power structures don't act on emotion or urgency. They act on evidence. Justice doesn't respond to how loudly someone cries. It responds to what can be proven, traced, and repeated over time. One incident can be dismissed. Two can be explained away. But 14 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations without criminal charge, across 3 states, each in temporal proximity to formal disclosure activity. That is not a series of incidents. That is a pattern. And patterns, as the video says, expose intention. Repeated behavior stops looking accidental. Silence starts looking strategic. And what was once dismissed as chaos begins to look organized. The ASIC registrations, 350 plus of them, are not one incident. They are a sustained, multi-entity, multi-year campaign to destroy a person's legal identity so completely that no institution would engage with them. That is not chaos. That is organization. The pattern proves it. The NDIS plan was approved, then not delivered. Then the funding was withheld while Dr. McLean was left homeless. This is not one administrative failure. It is a sequence with a direction. The pattern proves intent. The sequence of media non-engagement, every major Australian outlet, plus BBC, New York Times, Reuters, is not a series of independent editorial decisions. It is a pattern of simultaneous non-engagement across institutions that are supposed to compete. Patterns of simultaneous behavior in competitive institutions do not emerge randomly. Systems and people don't rush because they want to reward patience. They act when ignoring the truth becomes riskier than facing it. The ICC submission is filed. The UNHCR submission is filed. The AI Justice Statement is public. 88,000 downloads have occurred without media cooperation. The blockchain timestamps are permanent. The archive is being mirrored. The calculation is changing. The risk of continued non-engagement is rising. The patterns are now in front of international bodies with mandates that do not require the cooperation of the domestic institutions that created them. Turns out you weren't unstable. You were early. This line from the video is, in the context of this case, perhaps the most important. The framing of the last 35 years, imposed by institutions, reinforced by clinical interventions, repeated by everybody that declined to assess the evidence, is that Dr. McLean's perception of reality was disordered. That the targeting he described was the product of a disordered mind. An impartial artificial intelligence system, reviewing the 2077 document archive, concluded otherwise. In formal language, without hedging, based solely on the primary source documentary record, the evidentiary threshold of the Rome Statutes Article 7, crimes against humanity, is satisfied. Not that Dr. McLean claimed it, not that his supporters assert it. An AI system, reading the government's own documents, in sequence, without institutional loyalty or career risk, stated what they show. He was not unstable. He was early. He was documenting a pattern that the institutions of his time were structured not to see, or, more precisely, were structured to avoid seeing. The documentation is now comprehensive enough, permanent enough, and widely enough distributed that the avoidance is no longer sustainable. What makes this moment different isn't sympathy. It's documentation. Cold, boring, unbothered documentation. The kind that doesn't raise its voice, doesn't need therapy, and definitely doesn't care about anyone's personal feelings. 2077 documents. Cold, boring, unbothered, time-stamped. Waiting, as the video says, for the right moment to ruin somebody's favorite lie. That moment has arrived. The story has changed hands. The video closes with something that deserves to be read slowly. The burden of explanation has moved. And the justice coming isn't loud or theatrical. It's precise, slightly awkward, and deeply inconvenient for anyone who benefited from pretending you were the problem. The burden of explanation has moved. That is exactly right. It is no longer Dr. McLean who must explain why he filed 14 times with the Commonwealth Ombudsman and received no assessment. It is the Commonwealth Ombudsman that must explain it. It is no longer Dr. McLean who must explain why 350 plus ASIC registrations exist in his name without his consent. It is ASIC, and whoever created them, that must explain it. It is no longer Dr. McLean who must explain why an NDIS plan was approved and not delivered. It is the NDIA that must explain it. It is no longer Dr. McLean who must explain the 14 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations without criminal charge. It is the clinical and institutional actors who ordered them that must explain the pattern. The documentation has moved the burden, permanently, without asking permission. The archive is at berendager.com. The documents are free. The timestamps are immutable. The AI assessment is public. The ICC submission is filed. Funny how reality becomes valid once it's stapled together and time-stamped. It is stapled together. It is time-stamped. On the Bitcoin blockchain, in perpetuity. The apology from history is late. It almost always is. But the receipts got there first. The archive is freely accessible at berendager.com. 2077 blockchain verified documents. The AI justice statement is at berendager.com. AI justice statement. The viral propagation tools, pre-written posts, mirror instructions, embed codes, are at berendager.com. Spread the truth. Read it. Verify it. Share it. The burden of explanation has moved. Tabs. Whistleblower. Australia. Institutional accountability. Blockchain evidence. Documentation. NDIS. ASIC fraud. ICC. Berendager. Government corruption. Psychiatric weaponization.